Welcome to Decoding Devy. I am Brandon Hay, and you can find me on Twitter at HeyB3. And we are brought to you by the IDP guys. Make sure to check out that YouTube channel and subscribe. And I'm happy to have a special guest today, Colin Decker from Campus to Kitten. Finally getting him on after he's given me a lot of crap for having Matt Broning on twice before him. How are you doing, Colin?
I'm good. Now that I've actually been invited on, I have to stop. I can stop bothering you. And, Matt was on twice before me, but no, I'm good. We're all good now.
Yeah, so I asked you what position you thought you were the best at, and you said running back. So I thought we would talk about Devy running backs today. So first, I want to ask you. A lot of stuff is going on campus to Canton. Last week, I was joined by someone to talk about C2C strategy, and we plugged the site a couple times. Just wanted to let you say anything new that you guys are doing, or anything you wanted to plug.
Yeah, we're wrapped up with most of our summer projects. We released a couple draft guides, the freshman supplemental draft guide, the Devy draft guide, and the CFF draft guide. Those are all wrapped up. We're kind of moving into some preseason prep here. If you're a big college football fan, be sure to tune in on Saturdays. We're going to have live shows in the mornings before kickoffs, breaking down a lot of things from a fantasy angle, some DFS and betting advice too. And then at night, we'll wrap up the evening and, talk about anybody who really impressed us. Break down some of the games and performances and everything like that. So that's probably our biggest upcoming project.
Yeah, it was always cool to watch those morning videos, getting you ready for everything that's going on fantasy wise, or just previews of the games. So I'll make sure to put that in the link on the YouTube, so everyone just has that YouTube channel. And one of the things I want to talk about too is the difference in what you want from your running backs for compared to C2C to Devy. So can you just walk me through, at least in your opinion, what you're looking for if you're looking for a running back in a Devy league compared to Campus to Canton league?
Yeah, sure. So, the biggest differentiator is, you want production. So, you want a guy who's going to give you numbers on the college side as well, help you win the championship on that side. Now, at the top of the drafts, I pretty much approach it the same way that I would for Devy, because obviously the ultimate goal, win the NFL side. You want players that are going to move from the college roster up to the pros and be high-level producers right off the bat. Obviously, the dream is the marriage of the two: high-level college producer, high-level NFL future, guys like Bijan, Travion, those types of guys. But once, those are a diamond or, unicorns, it's hard to find those types of guys. So once you get after that, I do start to look a little bit more heavily towards production on the college side.
I think a good example might be those that have, say, Zach Evans over Sean Tucker. Zach Evans, you're looking at the traits on the NFL side that he might be a higher producer, but if you don't believe Sean Tucker has those, as high of traits, but he's putting up huge numbers at Syracuse. So, it might be just that kind of comparison, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Same type of a deal, the production can be a nice, like tiebreaker if you're really close on two guys, like you said, with Tucker and Evans. If you're pretty close on them, but you want a little bit more production on the college side, you go Tucker. If you lean a little bit more on the pro side of things, you probably put Evans ahead of him.
Definitely. And then the next question before we kind of get in more into the running backs is we've seen, especially at Alabama, Ohio State, and now this year with Penn State, we've seen very good or highly rated running backs both come in the same class, last year with Travion and Evan Pryor, and this year with Singleton and Allen. So what do you think about when those two come in? Because it looks like there's a premier guy and then another very highly rated guy that's coming in there. What do you think when that second guy, stays there? Do you think he's eventually going to transfer, or how do you kind of look at those situations?
Yeah, so with the transfer portal nowadays being so open, it's hard to predict, who's going to transfer at what point in time. But in terms of both, multiple highly rated running backs going to the same school in the same class. I think it really depends on what school they are committing to. A school like Georgia, they traditionally rotate their backs anyway, going all the way back to the days of Sony Michel and Nick Chubb. They rotated Gurley in and out there. Swift never really received the full workload there. There was always somebody working with him too. So for two guys, if they're both going to Georgia, they're both highly rated guys. I'm not as concerned because the school name carries a lot of weight in the NFL draft circles. Just look at this year with Zamir White and James Cook. Both guys got drafted, decent draft capital. So I'm not as concerned of a school like that. Same kind of deal with Alabama. Now Alabama does sometimes have a guy that they lean on a little bit more heavily, depending on what their backfield looks like, but you can still have a secondary guy drafted fairly highly there. When you look at Penn State and you have Nick Singleton coming in and Katron Allen coming in, both, highly rated recruits, I don't think there is going to be enough support for both of those guys, coming from the NFL. And I don't know if there's going to be enough production going around that they can sustain both of those guys. I think they're going to try at Penn State. I think they're going to try everything they can to keep Allen around. But if he's not getting the playing time, like I said, wide open transfer window, we could see him transfer out.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm actually interested in what Ohio State is going to do this year, because in the spring game, it looked like they were involving Evan Pryor a little more, so they might utilize him more, in the passing game and everything. So that might be able to keep him around. But it's very interesting how, those teams do that, because Pryor didn't get very much run last year because it's Travion and the other two veteran backs there. So now I want to go into just traits of running backs. So last year when I was doing some rookie scouting, these were like the 10 areas that I really looked at: vision, patience, elusiveness / lateral ability, breaking tackles, physicality, burst and acceleration, receiving, speed, contact balance, and quickness short area. So if you had to say your top three kind of traits you're looking for in a running back, what would they be?
So especially nowadays with the way that the game is moving to a lot more pass heavy, you're not really seeing these teams grind it out on the ground anymore. I want to see a running back be able to catch the ball out of the backfield, and not just on little swing routes and, maybe like an angle route out of the backfield, not like the more simple routes. I want to see them be able to be split out wide at times and be truly a mismatch in the passing game. That is something that it can really elevate a player's ceiling. We know that receiving touches are just inherently worth a little bit more than, carries. So we want somebody who's going to get the receiving work. Now, obviously not everybody can be a DeAndre Swift and Alvin Kamara, something like that. So as long as you can adequately catch the ball and at least be a 3-down threat, that's one of the biggest things I look at. And then going off of the list there, the other two are probably the two at the top there: vision and patience. Patience, it depends kind of on your scheme as to whether you're like a one cut and go and like a zone scheme, or whether, you want the guy to press the line a little bit more in a man blocking scheme. But I prefer the guys who can press the line, wait for the opening, and then hit that hole and take it to the second level there. And vision, I think of it as in two terms. One, vision to identify the correct hole, right out of the gate, right off the handoff. And then second level vision too, where you're looking downfield, you're thinking ahead, you're processing, you see where your guys are, your blockers, you see where the defenders are, and you're kind of manipulating it so your blockers, you're following your blockers, you're setting them up well to get the extra yards there. So those are probably the top three that I look at.
Yeah, I think before, like you're kind of talking about when it was more run heavy, run centric, teams, the breaking tackles and the physicality were more important. But one of the reasons I didn't necessarily have James Cook as high pre-draft is I did see he was very elusive, but it didn't seem when he got contact, it didn't seem like he ran through tackles. But I mean, he was drafted in the second round, and they didn't seem to care about that part. So I think you're correct with the receiving part. And then I think elusiveness is very important. They're trying to get people out in space, that kind of thing. And then, vision patience, like you said. I think contact balance is good too, because that means, when they go through the hole or get hit, they can still stay on their feet, and sustain those long runs. So, but I agree with a lot of what you're saying. The receiving part is so big because if you look at the, main top running backs in the NFL, really Derrick Henry is the only one that doesn't have a big upside in receiving.
Yeah, and like you're talking about with the physicality and tackle breaking, elusiveness, lateral ability, all of those things are very important as well. I want guys who are at the very least adequate in those areas. If you fall down at the slightest breeze, it's hard to be successful at the next level. If you're just strictly a straight line guy and you can't make people miss side to side, it's going to be tough for you to succeed at the next level. So you have to be adequate in your physicality and tackle breaking, your elusiveness, lateral ability, speed too. I want you to at least be able to break off like a 20-yard run. You don't have to necessarily house everything, but you have to be able to pick up some extra yards when it's there. And then after that, as long as you're adequate in all of those areas, I want you to have one signature trait that you win with, one finisher move type of a thing. If you're a Derrick Henry where you lower your shoulder and you can plow through and get an extra 5 yards off of that. If you're a DeAndre Swift and you have that nasty dead leg move where you can make guys miss, pick up a couple extra yards. Or if you're a speed back where you can just erase angles and pick up extra yards that way. So as long as you are adequate in all those other areas and have one finishing type of a move, like that's kind of what I'm looking for. I don't care as much what the finisher is, as long as there's an elite trait there.
Definitely. So we'll move on now to the 2023, Lloyd class. Like everyone has been talking about it, especially running back wise. So we both, I don't have it up here, but we both have a top 10. So I'll give my top 10 first, then you can give yours, and then we could just kind of talk about them. The one I think for everyone is Bijan Robinson out of Texas. For me, second is Jahmyr Gibbs. Third is Zach Evans, who's transferring to Ole Miss. So I'll be interested to see how he does. He kind of wants to not get the bulk load of the carries, kind of save himself for the NFL. Sean Tucker, Syracuse, we talked about before. Tank Bigsby out of Auburn. Kendall Milton out of Georgia. I really expect him to have a very good year this year. Israel Bonaconda out of Pittsburgh. Blake Corum out of Michigan. Then Devin Neal out of Texas A&M. And lastly, Zach Charbonnet out of UCLA. I only put Zach Charbonnet there at 10 because I feel like there's no one else. We'll talk about Zach Charbonnet, and I know we've discussed this before. I just don't think he's like an NFL like starter, but we can discuss that later. So go ahead and give me your top 10.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bijan, Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, 1, 2. I think that's pretty much across the board for people at this point. Then I have Zach Evans, Tank Bigsby, Kendall Milton, Sean Tucker, Zach Charbonnet, Devin Neal, Blake Corum, and then I have Jace McClellan out of Alabama. Now, I will also say with McClellan, I don't think he's going to declare this year. I question necessarily how much of a workload he's going to see behind Gibbs, but the talent is definitely there. So if we're just talking 2023 eligible backs, that's where I would include McClellan.
Okay, now let's kind of go through some of those names. We have a lot of similar names, just different orders. Bijan, I don't know if there's much that we really need to say. I think last year, just NFL, dynasty guys finally started looking at him. I think he's the complete package. He's good receiving. If you just watch his highlights, he does so many things in just one run. A complete back. So I think it's clear he's number one. 2 with Jahmyr Gibbs. I've loved Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's a nice blend of being able to run and just the passing, receiving ability. Do you think there's any possible way that Gibbs catches Robinson to overtake him as running back 1 next year?
Not for me. I mean, I like both of these players a lot. I think these guys both have the opportunity to be high-end NFL fantasy assets for you. But the biggest differentiator is Bijan just doesn't really have any flaws to his game that I've seen. He's good to great across the board, and that includes his size. So he has NFL size already. Jahmyr Gibbs does a lot of things really well. Excellent pass catcher. Like I was talking about being like a true weapon in the pass game. I think Jahmyr Gibbs can offer that. But the size concerns me just a little bit. He's more in the Aaron Jones ballpark, which isn't a bad thing at all, but it's still a little bit smaller. And that, just for that reason, I don't think I can see Gibbs jumping Bijan. That doesn't mean I don't think Gibbs isn't a very good prospect.
Is there any way that you think, I guess there's a way, but what, because everyone expects Gibbs to explode at Alabama next year.
Mm-hmm.
So if he were to say have a very mediocre season, could he fall down a couple spots to you, or just based on his traits and what he showed already, that doesn't necessarily matter?
He could fall down a little bit. Now, it would have to be a blend of him having a mediocre year and Zach Evans having a phenomenal year. I don't see anybody else on this list jumping Gibbs. But I could see Zach Evans if he has a phenomenal year there. He's extremely efficient, shows he can catch the ball as well too, and Gibbs kind of falls flat on his face. But just given the traits that he's already shown at Georgia Tech, I think it would be very surprising if Gibbs fell flat on his face, especially now having some other options in that passing or in that offense. Where at Georgia Tech, it was just him. And he struggled at times being efficient because he was the whole offense. But I think the efficiency is going to rise at Alabama.
Definitely. And I think also with the uncertainty at the wide receivers at Alabama, they brought in all those transfers. They have those, second-year guys. It should still be explosive, but I would think early on they're going to try to utilize Gibbs a lot. Speaking of Zach Evans, at least last year, Ole Miss used a couple running backs, and based on supposed rumors of what Evans wants, I don't see him getting all the touches and everything. But really, at TCU, we saw glimpses, but we really haven't seen consistent play of him over the season. So I think that's very important for him. And then we talked about Sean Tucker is 4 for me, and he is 6 for you. Why do you have Tucker down a little bit?
So I have Tucker a little bit lower. I like Tucker. I like a lot of what he brings to the table. I'm just a little bit concerned about what the NFL draft capital he's going to get coming from Syracuse. Syracuse hasn't had an offensive skill player drafted since I think like 2001. It's been a long time. Now, they haven't had anybody at the same level as Sean Tucker. So that is a little bit of chicken and egg, what comes first here. So I think Sean Tucker is very talented. I can definitely see him getting day 2 draft capital. I'm just concerned enough about it. And I think Kendall Milton at Georgia, it sounds like he's going to have a big year this year, at least from everything that is coming out of Georgia, provided he can stay healthy. And like we talked about, Georgia has a history in the NFL, so I see him getting some early draft capital as long as he can stay healthy, doesn't fall on his face. And then kind of the same thing with Bigsby. He'll need to bounce back a little bit, but I like Bigsby's skill set a lot, and I think coming from Auburn is going to help him too. So those 3 are all lumped very, very close for me. It's really just what is their draft capital going to look like, and I'm not sure with Tucker.
Definitely. I think that's a true, just example of, I know people that don't necessarily follow college football a lot. They just look at stats. And I think that's true that NFL doesn't really care how much you produce in college. You just have to have some production. You don't necessarily have, like we look at former players, that have come out of big colleges. And just off the top of my head, Mike Hart out of Michigan, he had all those numbers. I remember some people were doing mock drafts before his senior season saying he was going to be like a top 5 pick. And I was like, he's not, because he doesn't have those traits. He doesn't have the speed, doesn't have the burst. He's smaller. He might have had a better chance nowadays since teams are going with the smaller running backs. But in general, a lot of times those running backs that have huge, production years, aren't always picked, as high. So I could kind of see that. Sean Tucker is really, I like him a lot. And then Tank Bigsby, I think there's rumors last year about him having some injuries and everything. I think we're going to talk about some players that this is a big year for, and I believe you're going to kind of talk about him. But I really like Kendall Milton. A lot of people are forgetting about him with Branson Robinson coming in at Georgia. But I think as long as Kendall Milton stays healthy, he's going to lead that backfield. And I liked what I saw from the spring game. It looked like he had some more explosion. He caught some nice passes. And, we know Georgia loves to run the ball. So whoever that lead back is, I think will get a lot of draft buzz that way. And now you have Charbonnet as running back 7. I know you're a Charbonnet guy, so give it to me why you think he's going to have success in the NFL, or at least why you have him right that high.
Yeah, so we're talking we were talking a little bit about traits. It's kind of what the NFL looks for, and Charbonnet's a size speed guy. We clocked him at C2C. We did some mile per hour stuff. We have a couple guys behind the scene who do that. Big wide receiver guy and Solving Football on Twitter. Charbonnet was clocked at 21 miles per hour. He's 6'6", like right around 220 pounds. So he's a big guy, fast. He's athletic. He catches the ball well out of the backfield too. So I like a lot of what Charbonnet does. And I think he's going to have another big year this year. It seems like he's really going to have that backfield mostly to himself. So he'll have a lot of production this year. And then it comes down to some major question marks for the guys behind him for me. Devin Neal, a guy I like a lot. I think he has a really high ceiling. My big concern with him is right now he's 185 pounds. Now I'm hoping that that's more due to him being such a high-level track athlete and wanting to stay slim for track. Hopefully when he makes a decision to, give up track, go into the NFL, he can put on that roughly 15 pounds that people are expecting, or at least 10 pounds to get up into that CJ2K, CJ Spiller, Jamal Charles mold. If he can get there, Achane has a really high ceiling. But if he doesn't, that's a pretty big concern going in at 185. Corum's along the same line. Corum's a little thicker, but he's still smaller. And I don't know if he has that one trait to really hang his hat on that some of these other guys do that I was talking about a little bit earlier. So I have a little bit of a concern with that. And McClellan we talked about too. I don't think he's going to do much this year. He's more of a projection for 2024, but he is 2023 eligible.
So my main thing with Charbonnet is obviously I need to take my bias out and watch some more of him this year and last year. At least in Michigan and the games I saw of UCLA, if you give him a hole, he has that speed and he can take it 80 yards and everything. My thing is, if you don't have a hole, I just don't know about his just maybe escapability, his moves within the hole. That's why I see him as a committee type back. I just don't see him as a back that leads, a backfield. That's my main concern for him. Same with the chain, the size, but he, I was more impressed with him when I watched Texas A&M games last year than Spiller. He's very explosive. And with Blake Corum, need to see another year of production. I think if he doesn't have that ankle injury, he might, get 1,400 yards last year. I want to ask you if he has. I think he's going to be the 1A of that backfield. He's going to be the main runner, or have the majority. Maybe get like 55-60% of the carries. How hot if he's healthy all season? Say has another great year, over 1,000 yards. Say like double-digit touchdowns. How high can he move up this list with staying healthy, just based on his size?
Yeah, so really I have Bigsby, Milton, and Tucker clustered together, and then it's the other 4. So he can absolutely jump up ahead of Charbonnet, jump up to 6. And I could even potentially see him jumping Tucker if he has a huge year, because I think I can see a path to him getting some late day 2 draft capital, like a round 3 type of a guy. Even though he's a little bit smaller, he is thicker. He's like 5'9", 200 pounds. So he could probably put on maybe another 5 pounds, get 5'9", 205. And I think that's fine. And I do agree with you. I think he's going to be the 1A to that committee this year. He looks better running between the tackles. That's a question I have with Donovan Edwards, which, we can get into that a little bit later when we talk some 2024 guys. But I can see him jumping up to 7 over Charbonnet, maybe jumping Tucker, or if, Bigsby or Milton don't take the step that we think that they should, those guys could fall. Some other guys could move around. So really the top 3 are solidified. The next 3 mostly solidified. And then that bottom 4, that's kind of like another tier for me.
Gotcha. I think one thing that probably people that may look at Corum's size might not understand is he's not going to be your typical like speed. I think he has a lot of speed, but he's not your typical receiving and speed back. I think what's going to hurt him is he's going to be mostly used in the main running role. He's going to get some passes, but Donovan Edwards at least looks so great at receiving the ball, route running. They line him up outside. I think that's going to hurt Corum a little bit because he's not going to be able to showcase his receiving ability, which I think he is a good receiver, maybe not as good as Edwards. So I think that's how the split's going to go. And that might actually hurt Corum, in the eyes of, the NFL because he's not going to be able to showcase that. So I think he still could be he's going to be a day 2 guy, but he might be more near the end of day 2 based on just how much production he really has this year.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
All right, now let's go ahead and I didn't make a slide for this. So anyway, running backs most improved this year. So why don't you go ahead and start off with your first name?
Yeah, so my first name is a guy that you had inside your top 10, and I definitely don't disagree with that. I have Israel Bonaconda out of Pitt. He's got the traits, he's got the size, the speed that you're looking for. He catches the ball pretty well. Very limited sample size there, but he catches the ball pretty well, and he's pretty shifty in a short area. The big question with him is he hasn't really been able to separate himself from the rest of the running backs in that Pitt room thus far through his career, and those guys have been pretty mediocre. Now they are bringing in a new offensive coordinator in Frank Signetti. They return all 5 starting offensive linemen. They bring in Keaton Slovis to replace Kenny Pickett, and Slovis is not the passer that Pickett was. So I think this is going to be a more run-heavy offense this year. So there's definitely the opportunity for Bonaconda to really be able to show out and showcase what he can do. The big question is he going to be able to lead that committee and make it a 1 and 2 instead of like a 1A, 1B? And what is he going to look like with more work? Is he going to lose some of that efficiency? Is he going to maintain some of that effectiveness? So I think this is a big year for Israel Bonaconda.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And do you think, obviously they passed the ball more last year, but do you think the way that they rotate bats is indicative of they see all the bats the same, or just that the philosophy was we just want to rotate and keep them fresh?
I think the philosophy was more about rotation. And, Frank Signetti doesn't do that as often. He came from, he has some NFL experience, but most recently he was at Boston College, where they just pounded the ball with Pat Garwell, who's not really anything special. So I'm hoping that with a new offensive coordinator in there, they kind of change the philosophy and they lean on one guy a little bit more.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm hoping to see that. We'll see if Slovis can kind of pick up his stock from where it's fallen at USC. I don't necessarily have high hopes, but I think he can be fine in the ACC. Obviously, not Pickett, so we'll see. We'll see how that goes because they definitely want to go to the run heavy. So now for me, I'm going to kind of lump 2 guys together. In the SEC, in Kendall Milton and Marshawn Lloyd. Both have gone through injuries. Milton has shown more than Lloyd has, but Lloyd at South Carolina with that offense with Spencer Rattler, both of those, they just need to stay healthy. And For Lloyd, just show really anything on the field, and Milton show that he can stay healthy and productive. I think both of those guys highly rated recruits at fairly big SEC schools. South Carolina, I guess that's debatable how high they are, but they're going to get the time if they and showcase their skills this year. So I think both of them. It's very big for them moving into the draft next year, especially for Lloyd if he wants to come out early.
Yeah, that's the big question: is can those guys stay healthy? They had a ton of expectations coming in as recruits. Like we talked about with Georgia, they kind of rotate their backs. It's kind of a next man up type of a thing. So Milton's looked good in some limited work, but also dealt with those nagging injuries. So now that he's the guy, can he stay healthy? Huge question there. And then Marshawn Lloyd was drawing a lot of rave reviews leading into his freshman year prior to that ACL tear. Can he kind of recapture that form? Because I do think it's probably going to be a bit of a committee there in South Carolina as well, but I'm hoping Lloyd can establish himself because he's a guy I like a lot too.
And what's your next player that has a lot to prove?
Yeah, so the next guy I have on this list here is Tank Bigsby. It's a guy that both of us have ranked, pretty highly in this class. A lot of people have him ranked pretty highly in this class, and most of that's based off of his freshman season. He had a great freshman season. He really seized the reins, became the workhorse there. And then last year was pretty up and down. Now, we have heard some rumors that there was some injury that he was dealing with. Jarquez Hunter came in, and Jarquez Hunter I don't think he's anything special, but he's a really nice complementary piece, so they didn't have to rely on Bigsby quite as much as the year before. And then there's also a lot of turmoil in that locker room, too, from last year with the head coach, Brian Harsin, and some stories that have been floated out there about him. So that could have kind of created a perfect storm for why Bigsby had a down year last year. I think we really need to see him recapture that freshman season form. And if we do, I think it's a very good chance he goes day 2. If he doesn't, you're probably looking more at day 3 back, or one who decides to come back for another year.
Yeah, and interesting with Bigsby, he did put his name in the transfer portal for like a couple days, and they talked him into staying. So yeah, it's definitely interesting, all of that behind the scenes. And my second, well, technically third, but second option is Corey Kiner. He committed to LSU. We know LSU was a mess last year. Just looking at what he was doing, I thought he started off the season fairly well. Then he kind of fell out of favor. And then, some of the other running backs did very well. And then he kind of never really saw the field much again. We know with LSU, a lot of players just decided they weren't going to play anymore. And Kiner goes to Cincinnati, which I really like that for him. They run the ball quite a bit, have had a lot of success. I think Kiner has a lot of, what we're talking about, traits. He's powerful, on early on in his film last year. You saw in one game where, it was lower competition, but he stiff-armed someone and ran over them. And then another time he did this crazy spin move inside the 10 to score. So I think he has a little bit of everything there. And I think, he's going to be the most talented, at least to me, the most talented back that they've had at Cincinnati in the past few years. But the thing is, they've had a lot of success with running backs at Cincinnati, but they haven't necessarily been drafted high in the NFL or had that much production. But we have seen G5 schools like Memphis, put out running backs that have success in the NFL or get drafted at least, 4th, 5th round and have that success. I just want to ask you, what are your thoughts about Kiner and Cincinnati? And do you think that Memphis has had more success with their running backs because they're more of the speedy, running backs than the more grinder type running backs that Cincinnati likes?
Yeah, so I like Kiner. I wasn't a huge fan of him coming out. I thought he was okay. He's kind of a little bowling ball. He's got a little CEH-esque to his game, not nearly as good of a receiver. But it was encouraging to see him perform well last year and handle such a nice workload as a true freshman. And then transferring over to Cincinnati, that's where he's from. They lose Jerome Ford, so there's a pretty clear vacancy there. I think he has a really nice opportunity in front of him, like you highlighted. My question is, with Kiner, is how much better can he be than Jerome Ford was? Jerome Ford was transferred from Alabama, pretty highly thought of as a recruit. I think Jerome Ford is a better athlete, and he had some really nice production there as well. And Ford didn't get that high of draft capital. So that's going to be the big question with Kiner as well. In terms of, NFL success with Cincinnati backfields versus Memphis, I think a lot of the Memphis running back success had a lot to do with Mike Norvell when he was there, because he's kind of the one who was putting out those running backs. He was the one who was coaching Tony Pollard and Darrell Henderson, Antonio Gibson, and the early years of Kenny Gainwell. So I think a lot of that has to do with Mike Norvell and the way he coaches up running backs. So I think it's more that than one specific school versus the other.
Okay, definitely. Now we can go to this slide, the 2024 class. So I think, obviously Travion is one. And then I'm not necessarily as high on Braylon Allen because I want to see him do it another year, because he didn't really get to play against, a couple of the good defenses earlier in the year, and he had some huge games against some bad defenses. I know everyone does that, but I just want to see him be able to do that more. And I think Will Shipley is going to have a very good year. So I kind of think those top three, and then there's kind of a drop-off. As we've seen, in some of the ADP and drafts, especially C2C, Donovan Edwards is going up pretty high, and other than that Maryland game, he didn't do much last year. We're going just based on a little bit of film and a high recruiting profile and just some traits. So who are some of these guys after the top three that you think could perform really well this year?
Yeah, so outside of those top three, the first guy that I like is Devin Neal, running back out of Kansas. Now, he was a 3-star guy coming out, but I think he was a much better player than that. 24/7 Sports, their rankings, they had him as a 4-star. They had him as the 14th RB in the class. I think so. Devin Neal is a running back from Kansas, the state of Kansas, committed to the University of Kansas very early in the process. And I think some other services just kind of forgot about him a little bit, but he checks a lot of boxes there that we're looking for. He catches the ball very, very well out of the backfield. They can split him out wide. He's got really nice size, listed at 5'11", 210 pounds. So he's got good size, good speed, catches the ball really well. I think he's also very advanced as a runner, shows nice patience and vision too. So I like Devin Neal a lot, and a lot of what he brings to the table. My big concern with Neal is this essentially the same thing that I had, issue I have with Tucker is how is the NFL going to look at this guy when draft time comes around? And I think Tucker's going to be a really nice case study for that, because Kansas, very similar. I can't even name the last Kansas skill player that was relevant in the NFL. So I'll be curious to see how Tucker's draft capital goes this year. And that's going to tell a lot about what Neal's could be.
Definitely. And I think, I know Kansas's record wasn't great last year, but with the new coaching staff, they did beat Texas. I think they might have turned a little bit of a corner, so maybe they can be at least the middle of or close to the middle of the Big 12, so that might help in that. But I definitely do like Devin Neal. And one player that I wasn't necessarily high on until I started to watch the tape in the offseason, Raheem Sanders at Arkansas. I like a lot of what I saw with him. And they do run out of the shotgun a lot, a lot of read options with KJ Jefferson. But with the NFL moving towards more teams doing that, I think that could be helpful. That's not as much as a hindrance as it was before. And, he has some good power, and, he has some good lateral ability. And I like what I saw from him in his freshman year. So I'd like to see him, expand that even more. And I'll be interested with Arkansas losing Treylon Burks, if they'll maybe, run the ball even more early in the season until they kind of figure out the wide receiver room. So he's one that I'm very interested in this year. So you have another one on the list that has been gaining a little hype in the offseason. So go ahead and talk about him.
Yeah, so my other guy on the list here I have is Montrell Johnson. He was true freshman last year at the University of Louisiana. Um, and he follows his head coach, Billy Napier, from Louisiana to Florida. So that's always a good sign. You know, he's following his head coach. Last year, he had a really nice year, 838 yards rushing, 12 touchdowns. As a true freshman, you really like to see that, especially given that the system at UL, and then what we can kind of expect at Florida too, does rotate the backs pretty heavily. But Montrell Johnson is listed on Florida's website as 218 pounds, so 5'10", 218. He had a really nice 99-yard touchdown run last year, so he's got some long speed. Now, he was doing it against G5 competition, but just to break off a 99-yard run against anybody is impressive. So he's got the size, he's got the speed. I'm going to be interested to see, what his receiving ability looks like. But that Florida running back room is wide open this year. Dameon Pierce is gone. They have Naquan right there, but he's a little bit more of a pass catcher. They have Lorenzo Lingard, who was a pretty high recruit when he went to Miami and then came to Florida, but he hasn't really been able to put it together. Montrell Johnson is better than both those guys, and his familiarity with the system, I think, is going to lend itself really well to him establish himself as a lead back in the SEC. And if he can do that for a couple years in a row, I think the NFL is going to really like that.
I totally agree. And when I went over some of the spring games, I talked about that. And that was when DeMarcus Bowman was still there. A lot of people thought he was going to take over that backfield. In the spring game, I didn't think Bowman looked good at all. It was clear Montrell Johnson was the best running back, and they trusted him the most because they let him play on both offenses in the spring game, and he looked good on both. So I definitely like that. Another one for me, it's probably more to see if he's going to stay there. Evan Pryor, Ohio State, we kind of talked about it. They said they're going to use him more, but if they don't use him enough, I could see him transferring. So I kind of just want to look at that situation because I think he could be a very good running back. And just a couple other names I wanted to mention to see what you thought of. Kamar Wheaton going to SMU. And then it looks like Caleb Hood is going to possibly lead the North Carolina backfield. So how do you feel about those two guys?
Yeah, so with Kamar Wheaton, I mean, 5-star kid going to Alabama last year. But my big concern with him is he was always more athlete than running back. We didn't get to see him at all last year. He got hurt very early in the process. Transfers over to SMU, so he has a really nice opportunity there. He's going to need to take step forwards as an actual running back. Processing ability, vision, and patience, all going to be very key for him because he has all the athletic tools and traits that you want to see. There's not really anybody else on that depth chart. Trey Siggers is there. He could siphon off some work, but he's not the player that Wheaton is. And then with Caleb Hood's a guy that I like a lot. I was really high on him when he was coming out. He's a quarterback who converted to running back. He actually did not play in the fall of 2020 because North Carolina canceled their football season. So he got a chance to transition from quarterback to running back a little bit earlier, got on campus, made some impressions, but didn't really do anything during the season. I don't know what his role is exactly going to be this year. They have a couple of other big-bodied guys on that roster. They have British Brooks is still there. They bring in Amarian Hampton, who's a guy that you're going to talk about a little bit later. So I don't know what his role is going to look like, but he has a lot of the traits there. So I like Hood. I'm not quite ready to give up on him yet, although he has fallen a little bit for me.
Got it. And did help a little bit with Edmonds transferring out from North Carolina because a lot of people were very high on him last year. So now we'll go into the 2025 class. So I kind of went with some of the, well, I guess but you have one higher name, but Marion Hampton, watching his tape, I really like him. I think he could kind of be like the Javonte Williams, of that backfield. I could see him not getting much playing time this year, especially with those other bats already on campus, in practice, seeing him more next year. But I really liked a lot what I saw with him, and we've seen North Carolina able to have two-back system, and both of them being very successful with Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. So I really like him, even if he doesn't do much this year. So who's your first one that you like?
Yeah, so the first one I have on my list here is a guy that, if you follow us at Campus to Canton, and definitely some other people in the circle or in the Devy community are pretty high on here, but it's Jaden Blue. But I wanted to bring up Jaden Blue because, some people are like, oh, well, I don't really get it with him. He's not that highly ranked of a running back, but he decided in, I believe it was late April or early May, to opt out of his senior season for football. And I heard some speculation that maybe he had been kicked off the team. I've heard nothing about that. And I have heard from somebody that I trust that wasn't the case, and that he's been nothing but an exemplary player since he's been at Texas. But in April of 21, he was a top 50 player in the class. And then he didn't play at all his senior year. He fell and ended up being ranked 192. So he fell almost 150 spots in the rankings for a year that he never played. And I don't really think that that's his fault. He has a ton of talent. He's big, he's fast, he catches the ball really, really well. He processes the game at a very high level for a high school junior. We didn't see any senior tape on him, so it'll be interesting to see what he does this year. I don't expect it to be much, especially with Bijan there. And then they also have Roschon Johnson, who's a guy that they just like to give the ball to. But I think he's a play for 2023 and beyond because I like his skill set a lot.
Definitely, I think he's one that a lot of people like and know. He might not play that much this year, but he's been going pretty high in supplemental drafts and even just regular startups. So the next one I have is Terrence Gibbs. He had some injuries, and he's ended up going to Georgia Southern. So I'd like to see, obviously the competition level isn't going to be as high, but if he can, get healthy, he could be one of those players that, after a year or two at Georgia Southern, getting producing a lot, he could, transfer to one of those bigger schools, kind of, like some of these other players. So I'm really interested because before his injuries, he's really highly thought of. So I kind of want to see, if those injuries have taken a lot of, his high upside away.
Yeah, the injuries are the big question mark with him. If you look at his early high school tape, he was electric. He was on track to, potentially go to Florida. Like you said, Texas was interested, some of these big schools. And then that injury, he just never looked the same. So I'll be interested to see, can he recapture his pre-injury form and how long does he stay at Georgia Southern? Can he transfer to a bigger school if he shows that pre-injury form? My next guy that I have here is a little bit lower in the recruiting services, but he's a guy he definitely has a cult following in the community. It's Andrew Paul. He's a 3-star guy in the composite, RB 42 in the class, but he started to rise up the rankings towards the end of the year and then ends up committing to Georgia. And I actually think Andrew Paul has a chance to be better than Branson Robinson, the highly regarded 5-star kid that they bring in. You see those pictures of Branson Robinson out there just looking like an absolute animal. This dude does not look like he's 18. But Andrew Paul has more wiggle to his game than Robinson. He's got a little bit better long speed as well. So he's a guy that, even though Branson Robinson is there, don't forget about this kid. Because like I said, Georgia does have, they rotate their backs. And as long as you can show that you can produce at Georgia, the NFL is going to value that.
Yeah, do you see it possibly being like a Chubb Michelle type backfield with those two?
Yeah, I could definitely see that being the case. Branson Robinson, like I said, talented in his own right, 5-star kid. But Andrew Paul is I think he's going to force his way onto the field.
One that I just kind of liked his film, and he went to California, Jaden Ott. I've heard a little bit of buzz with people on him, liking him there. Obviously, when teams have super good offenses, and someone goes there that's kind of exciting, there's a little bit of buzz because obviously if you get time early, you could have production for 3 years, and that could raise your profile for the NFL. So he's one of the lower level guys that I'm kind of watching out this year to see how he does it at Cal.
Yeah, I think he has a really nice opportunity at Cal. They have Damian Moore there, but Damian Moore isn't really anything special. And I don't see them really recruiting over Jaden Ott. So he'll have an opportunity to show what he can do pretty early in his career, I think. And then the last guy that I have on my list here is another 3-star kid, Cartavius Norton, who's RB 62 in the class. He's going to Iowa State. 5'11", 210 pounds. And, if you're familiar with me at all, or Campus to Canton, my co-host at my podcast, Austin Nace, is somebody who has really been hyping up Cartavius Norton. He was a little bit lower in the recruiting services because he did miss time with a broken collarbone in 2020, which I don't think helped. But he goes to Iowa State. He's showing out early in the spring. And for anybody who might not know who it is, Phil Steele is a old head in the college community. He puts out an article out every year, or a magazine out every year, where he polls, his connections at all of these universities. And he actually has Norton projected as the starter for Iowa State this year as a true freshman. This is a scheme and a system too that lends itself really well to production. We've seen David Montgomery have success here. We just saw Breece Hall have success here. And I think Norton's probably a little bit closer to David Montgomery, but I think he can absolutely be a David Montgomery type of a back, which is valuable for Devy. I could see him potentially getting some late day 2 draft capital if things break the right way for him.
Definitely, as we saw with Breece Hall. I don't remember when Breece was a freshman if there was very much hype on him, but we saw once he got in there, he just produced. And a lot of times that can do more than having a recruiting profile, just showing that production on the field. And we'll just finish out. There's a few names running back wise. I just want to get your opinion on their NFL futures. There's a lot of, back and forth with Deuce Bond. He's been very productive at Kansas State, but he is very small. People, same college said, can he be like a Darren Sproles in the NFL? So what do you think about Deuce Bond? Is it truly just where he would go in the NFL draft that would kind of, make your decision on what he can do?
Yeah, I mean, his draft capital is going to be important. And then I think also the scheme that he goes to is also going to be important. I mean, we're at an age nowadays in the NFL where they're highlighting more of players' skill sets and they're tailoring game plans around players' skill sets rather than making players fit their game plan. So we've come a long way in that. So if he goes to the right situation, he absolutely has a skill set that can be fantasy relevant at the next level, a la a Darren Sproles or a Tariq Cohen, like kind of in that mold. He's excellent receiver. He is small, but he's actually a good runner between the tackles. He gets lost behind that line there. I mean, if you watch him, he just disappears sometimes in that pile and then pops out and then he's gone. So if he goes to the right system, he can absolutely have an NFL future, especially in a fantasy, and from a fantasy lens as well. It's just he's going to be an outlier in terms of size. It's difficult to bet on outliers, so I think you're going to see some people be off of him.
So is there any way that he could creep up into day 2 draft capital, or do you see him just being day 3?
I think if there's an NFL coach out there that, watches his tape and falls in love with his skill set and says, you know what, I have a way that I can use this guy, I could see him going late day 2. So it's not outside the realm of the possibility. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Gotcha. Definitely. Another running back that the hype was crazy last year before the season, Eric Gray. He transferred to Oklahoma. Many thought, he was just going to tear it up at Oklahoma. And for whatever reason, Kennedy Brooks played very well last year, but Eric Gray just did not get that many opportunities. So where do you see Eric Gray right now? Is he another guy that he just needs to have a really big season to kind of get back on the map?
Eric Gray has fallen pretty far for me, and I wasn't ever really that high on him to begin with. He's 205 pounds, so his size is okay. It's not great. It's not bad at all. It's solid, but I don't think he's great running between the tackles. He's a good receiver out of the backfield, absolutely, but I question his ability to run between the tackles. And that's kind of something that you saw last year too. Early on in the season, they gave Eric Gray out like workloads. They let him run the ball between the tackles. They gave him, the ball down at the goal line at times, and he just wasn't able to do anything with it. And that's part of what really helped Kennedy Brooks reclaim that spot, because Kennedy Brooks sat out a full year and then came back and then, looked really good. So I am lower on Eric Gray. I always have been. He continues to fall for me. He's not somebody that I see much of an NFL future for, but if he has a really nice year at Oklahoma, I think that will matter. Now he's going to be in a system where, Jeff Lebby, the offensive coordinator from Oklahoma, is coming from Ole Miss. That system rotated backs a lot. I think that's probably what we're going to see more of this year's, a tandem between Gray and Major. So I don't know how much of an opportunity he'll have to really show out.
Yeah, I think most people thought he was going to have more just workload in general, especially receiving. I just felt like they really didn't. I don't know if he fell out of favor because they tried to give it to him and it wasn't successful. But he just did not have even the kind of success receiving the ball that I thought he would. There were times he saw glimpses, but I didn't really see it all the way. And the last player is Tavion Thomas, running back out of Utah. He had a crazy amount of touchdowns last year. The Utah offense likes to run the ball a lot. The Utes have put some running backs into the NFL, but they haven't been overly effective. So do you just see, Thomas kind of as just like a grinder type running back, kind of like the old, standard running back, or do you think he could make some noise in the NFL?
I don't see much of an NFL future for him. I mean, I think he's going to have a really nice year this year at Utah. He's going to be the guy. But I don't see an NFL level athlete with him. I think this is basically going to be Zach Moss 2.0 here. Big guy, productive, slow, just not a good enough athlete, doesn't really catch the ball. He'll probably get drafted, but he's not somebody that I'm really targeting at all. I don't think he fits that well in the modern game.
Do you think, because I believe he would have another year of eligibility after this year, correct? Do you think he would come back, or he's just going to leave and try the NFL?
I think he's out of eligibility after this year. I'm not 100% sure on that with the way that the COVID works, but I have been operating under the assumption that he's going to be gone after this year. Utah's website does have him listed as a junior as I'm pulling it up here, so I guess he does have 2 years left, which makes him a little bit more intriguing for C2C, but it doesn't really help his NFL draft stock much for me.
Yeah, and just to add on that, with the COVID years and now with everyone being able to transfer right away, I have no idea how many years of eligibility some of these players have. It's so confusing. There's some players that have been in college 3 years and are still listed as freshmen. So it's so confusing nowadays. So I wasn't sure, but I don't know how high of a future he has. Like, some people are high on Zach Moss, and Zach Moss has looked horrible in the NFL. I don't know why they still give him the ball.
I think he's done.
I think he's done now that they got James Cook. But he just didn't show much explosion or anything. So that's interesting, because I know I had been looking at Tavion Thomas in a couple supplemental drafts, but that's mainly of just having that high producer on the college side. For this last year, if this is his last year, because Utah runs the ball a ton. He got, double-digit touchdowns last year. So that was a big reason that, I would even think about him.
Yeah, it's more the production that you're looking at Utah. And if he does have 2 years there, it's a lot more intriguing for C2C. But for Devy, you don't really care that much about the production. You're more looking at the traits, and I just don't think he has them.
Okay, Colin, that's great. I think that's going to end our show. We talked a lot about running backs. So make sure to subscribe to the ITV Guys YouTube channel. Like I said, I'll put the link for the Campus the Canton YouTube channel for the upcoming college season. Colin, thanks again for coming on, and we'll see everyone next week.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.